Okay, so if the footage in today's video looks a little rough to you guys, it's not the important part of the video, but still, it's because my backup footage hard drive failed, yay, and I needed to get this video out while it's still relevant to the subject matter. So, I've grabbed some footage from some much older videos so that most of you won't have already seen it or remember it properly, but YouTube compresses the footage horribly, meaning it may not look as crisp after 2 uploads. I sincerely apologise for that, I'm sure you understand, and I'm off after this to grab a lot more footage for future videos. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy, and DICE have produced a massive community broadcast in response to the TTK or gunplay changes that are planned. It's an effort to try to calm fears and provide some explanations as to what they plan to do and why. If you want to skip to purely the core aspect of today's video, then please do use this timestamp now shown on screen. If you want the full story though, then let's carry on. Now, I recently produced a video about these changes prior to this community broadcast. I'll link to it in the description, as being familiar with it will help today, but if you haven't seen it and you're short of time, essentially I have sources from which I can gain information regarding what DICE are doing, what their plans are, who is responsible for certain decisions, what their motivations are, etc, etc. Because of this, I was able to produce my video which stated that these changes are being brought in for new and less able players in order to keep them playing and to target sales for Christmas. Plus, because these changes are actually part of a long-term desire for how the game functions for a specific individual or small group of individuals at DICE, meaning that you cannot entirely trust what they say, as it is a business after all, and being 100% honest with the player base isn't going to aid them in pushing through all of their updates. That's just reality when it comes to business and a game of this manner in this state. Well, the community broadcast itself is a mixture of valid statements, half-truths, vague assertions, and corporate speak. Basically, there's some good and then a whole lot of bad and or misinformation, or drawing your attention elsewhere. So if you're not sure of certain aspects of the conversation, well, it can be quite easy to not fully understand what's being presented and whether you can take it as being reliable. So what I'm going to do is break it down and explain to you as well as I can, but also fairly briefly, as my last video on this topic was extremely long, and I will say that, despite certain denials, certain falsehoods, and generally misleading aspects of the community broadcast, more than enough of it backs up what I presented in my previous video for my claims to surely now be taken seriously. With that said, let's do this. So, I'm also linking to the community broadcast in the description if you want to verify anything I say today. I'm not going to keep flashing up sections on screen that I'm referring to, as it would be near constant and probably quite annoying for you guys. You can either trust me or go and look at it for yourself. So my first point is that the community broadcast is a pretty huge document, meaning that we won't hit on anywhere near everything that's in it today, just the parts that I think are most important. It's around 10 pages long, and this is being seen by some as a reason to take everything DICE have said at face value, as in, why would they write all that if it's not true? Or, why would they include that statement in that huge document if it wasn't accurate? That's very flawed thinking, I'm afraid. You can write down anything you want. I can, you can, they can. It doesn't make everything true. You can write things like promise, you can write things like anti-vision, you can write things like mantra, whatever you want. It doesn't necessarily make it true. Please remember that. This is business. The people in charge of the relevant decisions at that business are going to do what they personally think is the best for that product, from their perspective, from the business perspective, and all that jazz, not necessarily from your perspective. And the employees are going to generally do as they're instructed if they want to keep their jobs. Producing a massive document in response to the concerns about the TTK is an effort to keep the community on side, to show effort, to make it seem like it's all different this time, and to avoid the backlash of the previous time they tried to change the TTK, although the last time was a lot less well considered, etc. Now, this all makes sense, of course, but it's empty, or at least it can be. It's exactly like how in school you didn't get a good grade simply for writing a lot of words. The word count doesn't matter if the content isn't up to par. Now, something the broadcast actively refutes is that this isn't for so-called Christmas noobs, meaning they're saying this isn't put in place to grab Christmas sales and keep such players playing. I struggle with this point. In one theoretical way that plays into their idea of being more new player orientated, yes, but in another much more important way, absolutely not. How do DICE view all of this? No idea, but that's almost a point of unimportance here. Let's go into how it kind of benefits new players first, and why it could be for Christmas players, and then afterwards we'll hit upon why it's also not. Firstly, because it simply doesn't line up with the information I've received prior to this from other sources that have in fact always been right when the information eventually came out, just as in my previous video. The word is from them that this is an effort, at least partially, to target the Christmas period. And secondly, because how would what they've said make any sense at all? The document itself alluded to making the experience more new player friendly multiple times. How can you claim you want the game to be more forgiving and easier to get to grips with for new players, but say this isn't a change with Christmas in mind for new players? When I've heard from inside the company, as I've said, that that's exactly what is happening. And with Christmas obviously being known as a period to target for sales by businesses. Even if that does seem somewhat short-sighted for a game of this nature, with its reputation, over a year after release, I mean, it's all just so muddled and comes across as insincere, to be honest with you. The explanations truly just don't really line up properly. They've said that this comes after much consideration and planning, and this is just the first opportunity that they've had to put it in place. They wanted to get the game in a good state first and then implement this. And that does make sense, at least on the face of it. Perhaps it is partially to do with that. I won't deny that. That may be part of the case. And I do give a thumbs up to that aspect. But what also makes sense is that this comes after the success of the Pacific, so it didn't affect that big drive to effectively save the game, and now comes less than a month before Christmas. But is it possible that that's a happy side effect for DICE? Or that some of the people with controlling power don't quite understand the outcome? Maybe. But much more importantly, even with easier recoil, the need to land more damage requires better target acquisition and tracking, not something a new player is known for. So in that sense, it's absolutely not for new players. It's going to be harder in that regard. They may live more but kill less. Is that better? Yeah, maybe not for them, really. So does this altogether make sense? Not really. Not based upon their explanations, but their explanations are contradictory anyway. Onwards, and I really am going to try to keep these points brief. So the whole thing about making the game new player friendly is a thing. It's literally in the community broadcast. I said it in my video as I knew it to be a fact. And now you know it as a fact as well. There's no speculation anymore. And there are many aspects of this broadcast that contradict each other or simply don't make sense. You really should read it yourself, as I can't highlight them all, but a core aspect through all of this is ease of use combined with not being ruthlessly killed over and over. There's a claim that they don't have data to show that people are dying too quickly though, even though they've been monitoring such things for all of the year the game's been out. But last time they were going to change the TTK, they said that they did have data to show that people were dying too quickly. So already there's some inconsistency at play. Were there lies then? Were there lies now? Is this more half-truths? Are they trying to say the right thing now or then? Or what is it? What is the answer? And if they actually don't have that data, then that plays into my statement previously that this is sort of an overall vision. Even though I know either way that's the case, by the way. Like it's absolutely irrefutably the case. This is not just a reaction to somewhat recent events, and in no way being put in place for the benefit of the majority of the current player base. You do not factor into their considerations right now if you have been playing Battlefield 5 for the last year. The only way you feature is if there's a massive uproar, these changes don't work, and they change it back. They say they're going to keep listening to feedback, so please keep giving it, but everything I've said so far and everything I said in my previous video and back when they changed the TTK last time, it all still stands. Be aware of the situation. Now, part of this making it easier for new or less skilled players is a reduction to recoil on certain weapons. To quote from the broadcast, many of the weapons that we've made adjustments to see their recoil reduced by around 20% on both horizontal and vertical recoil, except in certain cases where we've more aggressively adjusted the damage values at range, i.e. made them weaker. Here we are tweaking both recoil values by around 40%, with the exception of some MMGs, where we're confident that their rate of fire still makes them a dangerous threat. Now I ask you, do you understand how large those changes to recoil actually are in terms of how the gun will feel to fire? That makes certain weapons so much easier to use. So yes, it will be to mitigate the increased number of bullets needed to kill at range, but not by much, not as much as people think it will, or as they're going to present to you it will. I mean, the MG42, I know this is like the extreme example, but the MG42 needs 13 bullets to kill at 100 meters after these changes, at least from what they've shown us so far. And I'm not saying I don't want some things nerfed and rebalanced, but again, there can't be claims this isn't a TTK shift drift or anything like that, or this won't change the gunplay a lot, because it just will. Whether good or bad, it absolutely will. So now, close quarters fights will be pretty laser beam-esque, making for even more simple gunplay than we already have. Even more kind of just, point and shoot. And at long range, a lot of things are just going to be pretty awful, and that's by design. They seemingly want, and kind of allude to themselves, to have weapons that fit within certain ranges specifically. Again, not saying whether that's overall good or bad, but, keep it in mind. They claim, and I'll quote again here, that they have not set out to change the time to kill in Battlefield. But they have, whether you intend to or not, and they did by the way, they have changed it. That's an unavoidable fact. Yes, there may be more weapon diversity now. Weapons now may have more unique or curated set roles and ranges. There may be more scope to add weapons to the game that have unique properties and such like, because there's more things they can balance off of. All of these things could be genuinely positive aspects, but you can't also say with that you haven't tried to change the time to kill. You can't say, and I'm going to paraphrase here, that you're trying to maintain the lethality of the game, especially at close to mid-range, because that's still changing the game. It's still changing the time to kill, it's still changing the gunplay. And discounting long range from that as if it isn't of importance, which is kind of how this comes across, is an absolute fallacy. A bolt action will still one-shot you to the dome at, say, 100 meters. The boy's AT rifle will still one-shot you to the body at up to 100 meters. But SMGs, assault rifles, etc. will need far more bullets at that range now, hence the supposed weapon diversity. I'm not saying again that that's all bad. I'm gonna wait to play it. Some of it could be good, I get the logic behind some of it, but don't try to dress it up as if it isn't a change to the time to kill of the game, because it obviously is. That obviously has a huge effect upon the playing experience. I also want to highlight two other quotes. Firstly, the current time to kill is perfect, but only if the right player is using the right gun and in the right situation. And quote 2, the balance caters strongly towards highly skilled players who largely ignore the breadth of weapons available in the game. I really don't like these two quotes being used as reasoning for changes. For a start, in almost every first-person shooter, there's a meta for weapons that are used and those that aren't used. That's just how it is. Yes, you can try to rebalance so that things are used more, but to use the initial part of those statements as an explanation for it is just flawed. And why are we to a point of changing games to lift up new players and bring down skilled players? It can be claimed that that's not what's happening here, but it is, at least going by the quotes they've just presented. If those two quotes are problems for DICE, and changes are being made to combat them, then you can't dress it up as anything else. What happened to trying to get better at the game? I sucked at first-person shooters when I first started, and now I do this for a living. That was the norm back then. You were bad, you played, you got better. That's pretty much everything in life. Why are we trying to pull away from that in games now, especially in first-person shooters? It's partially the company's fault and it's partially the player's fault. It's a vicious cycle. But I wish it wasn't a thing. The term get good can be quite toxic, but sometimes it's just valid. You need to get good. I had to get good at playing games. I had to get good at trying to make videos. I had to get good at learning numbers when I was a kid or learning to spell. You see what I'm saying? What happened to your reward for getting better actually being that you are now better and can utilize those skills? I don't know if they meant for it to come across like that in those two quotes, but if they didn't, then it's put horribly. Like that's not a good way to put it across the community. And if they did mean it like that, well then it sucks. I mean, there are plenty of easy to use weapons in the game for both low and high skilled players. And there are already some skill cannons in the game. Claiming that these changes are to create that holds no weight for me, as I, and many, already feel that scenario exists. Oh, and just to drop this in here actually, I've been told that some of the nerfs to rate of fire on some weapons are pretty extensive, so don't expect all guns to now fire faster to maintain that same TTK or whatever that dude tried to present recently. Some now fire more slowly, at least in terms of the plans that are currently in place. Whether that changes when it's released, I don't know. But with that knowledge in mind, as of right now, there's absolutely an attempt to alter lethality, at least at certain ranges in certain engagements. Anyway, back to the point. This sten is used as an example, within the document, of a weapon that can be used for all situations, and there's no motivation to switch weapons, etc., which I find to not be totally true. Yes, the sten is versatile, and perhaps a slight change to it could be warranted. And I only mean perhaps, and only if a few other things were tweaked as well. Really, I don't have a problem with the sten, and to say there's no motivation for some players to change is simply because they are choosing that versatility. That is the point. The balancing factor is its suboptimal time to kill right now. I can tell you that it loses flat out to the Tommy gun or the Suomi at close quarters, in an engagement of equally skilled players firing at the same time. It's not got a bipod for extreme long range, unlike the ZK383. It's not got as good hipfire as this or that or whatever. They've said that they want a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling, with some easy to use weapons that aren't super rewarding for all situations, and some guns that have a higher skill requirement and are therefore more rewarding. How isn't the Sten a pretty perfect example of already having that? At least in this instance. I just feel that totally doesn't make sense and shows a lack of understanding, or perhaps an attempt at making a round shape fit a square hole where this document is concerned to try to appease the player base that maybe doesn't quite understand what they're reading. And I don't want to drag this out, I think by now you get the point. This is already a bit longer than I wanted it to be. These changes are being put in place for clear reasons, but the explanations you're getting from DICE are far less clear. They're convoluted, muddled, contradictory, and whether it's actually honest is debatable. There's overall poor communication, whether it's by design or just bad work, and the game will be changing quite significantly in some ways. Whether everyone will be able to recognize that when they play it remains to be seen, but the knowledgeable and reasonably skilled will absolutely be able to tell. That said, there are some good reasons for change, whether they actually be the reasons for the changes or just a happy coincidence for us and or DICE, at least just on that specific point. And we'll have to try it all out to see what works and what doesn't. I just hope it all works out well in the end, but we'll have to wait and see. Remember to check the provided link if you want to read the document for yourself. There's way more in there than I've covered today, and also let me know in the comments what you think of all these planned changes and the reasons for them. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, leaving a like would be honestly huge for me, and thank you for all the support recently, I do appreciate it. Subscribe and turn on notifications to catch my future content, and feel free to join my Discord server and follow my stream in the description and my pinned comment. Here's the Board of Awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and love them all deeply and of course, often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time. Laters. BF1 has a slower time to kill than BF4, at least initially, and with BF5 we've seen this progression abruptly accelerate. The second closed alpha experimented with slower TTK, and the update I've already spoken about from 2018 experimented with even slower times to kill, before they had to do away with it all when the community had just had enough.